Go ahead.
Oh yeah, so we're back from the break. We're still the Propaganda Podcast, and here's our CIA for the week. The Nobel Prize. Over the last 2 weeks, you must have followed, a lot of media hype about who the Nobel Prize goes to. And I don't know if this makes a lot of difference to our lives. This is the question that I asked myself. What sort of a difference does the Nobel Prize, especially the one in economics, that was given to Professor Hart and Ångström, what sort of a difference does it make to my life? Why should I be reading about them? What sort of a significance is there to the Nobel Prize? And then, that started a strain of questions that, I kept asking, kept reading about. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just talk a bit about the Nobel Prize, where it comes from, who's the man behind the prize, and if, what does this prize do, right? Because when I was young and naive, I really wanted to win. I wanted to be one of the people who would win the Nobel Prize. Not anymore.
Literature, which one?
Not anymore. Any one of them. Not anymore. I never studied to be a doctor, so that pulls that out. I was good at chemistry. In high school, I was good at chemistry. But I didn't continue that further, so that's out as well. So there was either the possibility that I could be a recipient. There still is the possibility, though, but wait for that.
Yeah, literature. You're going for the
literature, peace, economics. What else? Physics? No, man. Physics not my thing. No, totally not. So yeah, but then as of today, I really don't think I would like to be a Nobel laureate, and I don't know why. Here's why. So on the face of it, we read about the Nobel Prize. It's really interesting, right? You want to know who goes, who gets the prize.
We all want it.
Yeah, we all at some point have wanted it. Let's say, it is the highest honor that can be bestowed upon a human being as the world exists today. But we don't really know about the dark origins of the prize, right? Alfred Nobel, the chemist, the scientist, the man that funded his wealth to the Nobel Prize. You could make your judgments about him. I would just give you a few facts about his life, which I don't know if you've researched or not, but I have. So, personally, he was a pacifist, was born of Swedish origin to a family of Swedish engineers or scientists, let's say. His father was somebody employed. His father was a chemist who was in the machine tools and explosives industry, right? They moved to, when he was young, they moved to St. Petersburg. There they made a fortune during the Crimean War of 1856 and 53. And after the war, they had really nobody to sell their explosives to. So they went bankrupt and then they moved back to Stockholm. But Alfred Nobel, he was a genius. By the age of 17, he could speak 6 different languages. And he was already working with one of the top chemists back in the day. And so he went on to boost family business. And he got 300. By his death, he had 355 patents that were registered to his name, right? The most famous of them being dynamite. He was the guy who actually invented dynamite.
Wow.
Yeah, and also the ballistite, which is the precursor to the modern ballistic missiles or the ballistic explosive that we have, right? So that was the sort of background to his inspiration in being what he was. So in 1888, one of his brothers died. And while he lived in France, by the way, his permanent house was in Paris. From 1850 onward. For about 30 years of his life, he spent over there, 1850s. And over there, he read a premature obituary of himself. So it was a case of, bad journalism gone worst. So his brother died, but the French press assumed that Alfred had died. And this actually, served as the silver lining in the cloud. So the obituary was titled, "The Merchant of Death is Dead." And this sort of activated his existential guilt, This article went on to condemn him for becoming rich, quote, by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before, unquote. Now, this sort of bad press brought him about this decision to leave a better legacy after he dies, because he did not have a wife nor any children. It is quite possible, though, that the French were just angry at him for selling his explosive ballistite to Italy, which was then a competing power. While we're talking about that, in 1891, he was accused of high treason and expelled from France. So he moved to Italy. But later, the charges could not be held in a court of law, and he came back to Paris to live over there. And over there, while he was sitting in a Paris cafe in a Swedish club, they say, he just gathered his assistant. He wrote down his will in 1895, and he wrote down his will and went on to bequeath his wealth, which is estimated to be one of the largest private fortunes of the world at that time, to be awarded to constitute a fund. The interest of this fund were to be awarded, quote, to those who during the preceding year shall have conferred the greatest benefit on mankind. Bam. There was the Nobel Prize, right? As a result of existential guilt, bad press, and bad journalism, and of course dynamite. Lots of dynamite money. Now, he died in 1896. It took about 4 years of negotiations between his relatives, the King of Sweden, and other people, claiming that, this was not a proper way for a Swede to just dedicate his life's earning to anybody, people of the world, irrespective of their Swedish heritage, blah, blah, blah. But eventually, his executors of his will, they stood fast, and in 1901, the first Nobel Prizes were awarded. And since then, it's been about 115 years, if you calculate, it's been about 115 years that the Nobel Prizes claim to honor men and women from all corners of the globe for outstanding achievements in physics, chemistry, physiology or medicine, literature, and for work and peace. These are the original 5 prize categories that he himself named it as well. But in 1968, the Swedish Central Bank funded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in the memory of Mr. Nobel as part of the celebration of their 300 years of existence. Now, yeah, that tells you a lot. Economic sciences, yeah. So that's how it all started. But let's talk about the prize now. Historically, the Swedish Royal Academy of Sciences, the Royal Academy of Sciences in Sweden, has been awarding the physics and chemistry prizes, and the Karoline Institute awards the prizes for medicine, physiology, and a Norwegian parliamentary committee does the one, the Nobel Committee from the Norwegian Parliament, that does the one for peace and for literature. Well, and then we have the Royal Academy of Sciences again from 1968 onwards, also having the say on the prize in economics. The prize was has been historically shrouded in secrecy and legend, and it was only in 1976. Now, I'm using some of the material that I'm using comes from Robert Friedman, who's a historian of science in Oslo, who's written a book about the Nobel Prize, of course. It was only in 1976 that for the first time in about 75 years that the Nobel Committee opened its archives in terms of its deliberations. How do they determine? Who do they determine? What goes on in awarding who gets the prize? And it shows that the Nobel medallion is etched with human frailties, right? Now, we could understand, I could be sympathetic on the face of it, to the fact that, the prize in literature could be, subjective. The prize in peace could be subjective, right? But none of us over here would think that, in prizing somebody for medicine, for physics, for chemistry, or even for, I don't know, let's talk about economics is our later subject. They could in some way be dictated by subjective concerns, right? Because that's like hardcore science, right? Science. But that's really not the case. It has always been, as Professor Friedman argues, that it's always been the committee members' own understanding of science that has been critical in determining outcomes of who gets the prize. And one of the classic examples of this is Albert Einstein, right? Let's talk about Einstein a bit. In 1905, at the age of 26, Einstein published 3 papers in 1 year, right? That was his annus mirabilis, that is miracle year for Einstein. That went on to influence 20th century. not just the physics of the 20th century. One of these papers was about the special theory of relativity, which describes, as some of you may know, how space and time, or mass and energy, could interchange at high speeds. The other paper that he wrote describes Brownian motion. This is the irregular motion that is performed by small particles in a liquid as a result of their collisions with other liquid molecules. The third paper explains the photoelectric effect, why light can make electricity leave metal surfaces. Something that we, or scientists, not we, use in ordinary photocells. Now, of these three theories, the theory of relativity became the one that most was written about and discussed, and one that Einstein's most famous about. But when the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences year after year asked scientists for nominations, many answered that Einstein deserved a Nobel Prize in physics for his special theory of relativity. But the Nobel Committee thought otherwise. And for years, it was only until 1921 that he got the prize. So he had to wait, 16 years? And a lot of this... Well,
Why?
I'll come to that in just a second. A lot of this has to do with the Nobel Committee for Physics itself. There was a powerful member on the committee, Alvar Gullstrand, a professor at the Uppsala University and a Nobel laureate in physiology for the year 1911, for his work on how the light bends in the eye. In his opinion, Einstein was wrong, and he tried to prove that he was wrong by making his own calculations. But as it stands today, we know that Gullstrand was wrong, but what this goes on to show that is his opposition, this one guy's opposition, was strong enough to block the prize for Einstein for 16 years. And it happened so that in Uppsala was another professor, Carl Wilhelm Osin, a specialist on mathematical physics, who understood Einstein's theories and had also understood the power balance in the committee. So when he was elected as a member of the committee in 1921, he was the first person to propose giving a Nobel Prize to Einstein for his work on the photoelectric effect. Right? And this single nomination from a committee member itself made the wheels begin to turn in Einstein's favor. Yeah, and it was in 1921 that Einstein was granted the Nobel Prize for his services to theoretical physics, and especially for his discovery of the law of photoelectric effect. He was never. Yeah, that's the bum side to it.
Wow.
A question has often been asked in scientific circles. So was the Royal Academy of Sciences mistaken in not giving its award of a Nobel Prize to Einstein for what most people, at least, consider his most important intellectual discovery? Some people argue that is the case. But I think it's also to do with what Alfred Nobel had willed. I think that's where this light. Well, in its own, the theory of relativity definitely was a breakthrough in terms of the way we saw the world, right? But it was his introduction of the photon that surpasses his contributions in terms of special theory of relativity. This concept of the photon, the wave particle, which not only lies at the heart of our understanding of both micro and macrocosmos, has led to technical applications such as medical laser scalpels, laser diodes on the internet, and so on. So that is the discovery that has actually made a lot of benefit for the mankind, as Alfred Nobel had willed. So there lies, your story of Einstein and his Nobel Prize. But this one very famous example, right? Einstein's ghost still continues to haunt the Nobel Academy. They've had disagreements on that, and this part on the Einstein story, I rely on the article by Andreas Bane. He's now a member of the Swedish Academy of Royal Sciences for Physics since 1990, and he's also curator of the Nobel Museum. And he goes on to say, how this could be botched up. There's apparently subjective criteria for determining what good science is or what science deserves to be prized is really not the case. You have individual egos that go on into selection, into nomination, and eventual award of prizes. But this one very famous example I was saying, and it's not the only one. There's so many. Most recently, I think it was in 2011 that we had quarrel on immunology. The prize was given to some scientist on immunology who was then again, there was other contenders for the prize who said he was relying on a lot of our work. And this is one point that I'll come back to. There are no unambiguous and impartial criteria for selecting a winner. Therefore, I argue, much of the halo that surrounds the prize needs to be dimmed, right? We do not have to attach that much importance that we attach to the Nobel Prize winners, It could be a lot of factors that go in selecting a prize winner. And there could well be the case that I, sitting over here talking, am worthy of a Nobel Prize, but they just don't know me, right? And nobody's nominated me, and probably some of them don't like me for what I'm saying.
I think you are definitely worthy.
Thank you. But apart from the pettiness and partiality that marks the Nobel Committee, and this is my second point, the prize also confers legitimacy to a very individualistic image of science that advances only through the efforts of a single genius. Now, as appealing as this image is, I think history of science and history of all, thought tells us that this is really not the case, right? Research has always progressed as a conversation. It has always been worked by so many before the people finding the discoveries, and in opposition to so many that have worked before them, right? So you need to understand that, Einstein falling down on special theory of relativity was already arguing in a tradition of Newtonian physics, right? So, but nobody recognizes that in some way. So it is a classic public good. We know knowledge, it is a classic public good. There's so many spillovers from, what you've written, what you've published, and what I use in the way I go on to find the discovery that I go on to do. So brilliant minds matter, but it's often inappropriate and unjust to limit recognition to few when so many extremely talented scientists may have contributed to a given breakthrough. Now there's again the Nobel bylaws that restrict recognition to a maximum of 3 people. This excludes a lot of discoveries that are entailed by more than 3 researchers, or omitting key persons who equally deserve to share the honor. Also, I think problematic in the whole structure of the Nobel Prize is the key scientific categories that shape our, workings of the world today. Environmental sciences being the most, I think, most important of them currently as we see ourselves today. They deserve recognition, right? Environment being one of the most relevant categories in science today. But not only this, the prize in science is among a strong commentary on the inequality in our world. An overwhelming 60% of all Nobel laureates in chemistry, physics, medicine, and even economics are affiliated to one of these following 6 American universities. Yes, 6 of them. MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Caltech, Columbia, and Berkeley. That's it. That's 60% of all of your Nobel laureates. That tells you how the system is hitched up against people like me, And if you add Cambridge to them, this becomes a total of 560 Nobel laureates from these 7 powerful institutions, and that becomes a whooping 73% of all prizes in these categories. And if you go on...
Oxford's not in there.
No. Unfortunately not. And it's about 90% of these people, 85 to 90% of these people already have a doctorate. There was this really cool graphic that I saw at their website, which shows on, what institutional affiliations they go, and also cities they belong to. Interestingly, New York is the one single most biggest city that has the most Nobel laureates from 51 people coming from New York.
Ooh, I got a chance. I was born in New York.
Well, there you go.
You're from Miami.
But I think
born in New York.
It's this fixation also on prizes is something we should cherish. I am not very fond of this. Neither this hyper competition that such a culture promotes. And I quote one of the finest minds of the last century, himself Nobel Prize winner, denouncing the word, Richard Feynman, when he went on to take his Nobel Prize in physics. He went on to say that I don't see that it makes any point that someone in the Swedish Academy just decides that this work is noble enough to receive a prize. I have already gotten my prize. The prize is the pleasure of finding a thing out, the kick in the discovery, the observation that other people use it. These are real things. The honors are unreal to me, and I don't believe in honors. But I think the most famous of the outliers, and my personal favorite, is the French writer-thinker Jean-Paul Sartre, who in 1964 became the first person ever to decline the Nobel Prize. And today, there's only been 2 people who've declined the Nobel Prize. Vietnamese revolutionary Lee Duc Tho was the second person to do so in 1973 when he turned down the Peace Prize for his role in the Paris Peace Accords that sought to establish peace in Vietnam on the grounds that there was no actual peace in Vietnam. And if Bob Dylan goes on not showing up and not responding to the communication from the Nobel Committee, we'd probably may have a third, person who wins on. I don't know if he's going to refuse it. He's not come out. We potentially may have a third refusal of the prize.
Oh, Bob Dylan, right?
Yeah, because he's just not communicated. He's not said anything about it. Well, the reason I mentioned s03e is that some of the arguments that he uses to decline the prize are very telling even today. And I'm not going to go into whole text. We're going to read that. That is a part of our morale for today. But he makes up a very good point in terms of saying that, the only battle possible today, and I'm quoting s03e, the only battle possible today on the cultural front is the battle for the peaceful coexistence of the two cultures. That is, of the East and of the West. I mean they must not embrace each other. I know that there's confrontation among these cultures, and this must necessarily take a form of a conflict. But this confrontation must occur between men and between cultures, without the intervention of institutions. Right? I myself am deeply affected by the contradiction between these cultures. I am made up of such contradictions. My sympathies undeniably go to socialism and to what is called the Eastern Bloc, but I was born and brought up in a bourgeois family and a bourgeois culture. This permits me to collaborate with all those who seek to bring the two cultures together. And he, in this article that we'd read later as a part of our morale, he goes on to criticize how the Nobel Prize has been seen as a Western recognition, as being a prize for Western writers and Eastern rebels. And he also takes point with the fact that Pablo Neruda, one of the finest South American poets ever, was not awarded with the Nobel Prize, and the prize was given to Boris Pasternak from Russia, who was later forbid by the Soviet government to go and receive it, and not to Sholokhov and somebody who could be read also in Russia, and he goes on to say that he's not going to accept this prize, and he just declines it. But that was something about the original Nobel Prizes, right? That is Alfred Memorial, the Alfred Nobel's own prizes that he constituted to be able to recognize the greatest benefits to humanity. But in 1968, we had the Swedish Riksbank, the Swedish central bank, establish a Nobel Prize in economic sciences. This was to honor the memory of Alfred Nobel and also to celebrate their 300 years of existence. The prize, Abner Offa argues in his book about the Swedish, about the Nobel Economics Prize and its origins, was that it comes out of conflict between interests of the better off in the stable prices and interests of everybody in reducing insecurity by means of taxation and social investment and transfers. So basically the argument that he's trying to make, and something that I'm also sympathetic to, is that the Nobel Peace Prize comes at a time when there are tensions in Swedish economy about recognizing market principles, something that economics claims to work with, the rationality of me first, egoistic self, and a greater power for the state in terms of distribution, in terms of public investments in education, health, transport, and so on. But it is this background to the prize that is also very telling about the prize. Now, this Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has tried to give an appearance that they take economists of all sorts of leaning, Keynesians, formalists, Chicago school people, formalist, empiricists, right and left, but I don't think that's the case. Of the 58 Nobel laureates that have been awarded the Nobel Prize, 10 were faculty members in Chicago. Right? 5 of them were faculty members in MIT, 4 of them have been faculty members in Harvard, and most of the work that has been recognized has to do with the functioning of market mechanism. Now, I understand that market is one of the fundamental concepts in microeconomic theory, right? But still, that goes on to tell you that this is in total opposition of a parallel conception of the economy that works to the benefit of everyone, and not just efficient markets where a handful of people profit out of. And just as a historical anecdote to it, it was Swedish economist S.R. Lindbeck who was the prize kingmaker, and he was the guy who actually, like the example that I previously presented for in Einstein's case, he was the guy who was influential in determining who gets the prize and who does not, right? So most of the work that has been recognized, I was looking at the prizes that people have won, the people who've been awarded the Nobel Prize. They are so, diversified as they are, but their work is mostly in classical economic theory, and not in something that Abner Offer argues about, social democracy, right? Something that has been in work in Scandinavia for a long time. It needs to be theorized, it needs to be recognized, but that's not what they're doing, right? Only 3 economists from Norway or Sweden working in that tradition have been recognized, not broadly working in that tradition. That's it, right? And only in 2008, the prize of 2008 goes on to tell you a very interesting example. You have the financial crisis. Now the Nobel Committee is thinking, if you go on and give somebody who works within the market logic, right, and then we get bad press for it, right? And if you go on and give somebody, left of the spectrum, then we recognize that there's something problematic with the market. So what they do is they give the prize to people who worked on economic governance, to make a statement about, we need to get economic governance in order. Problems with the commons. I'm forgetting, it's a female scholar from the United States that shared the prize with their pioneering work on economic governance. But anyways, the prize comes from concerns that were similar to those of the IMF, the World Bank, what we call the Washington Consensus. Cut subsidies, lower taxes, cut public spending. And this deregulation of credit, something that we see and that we can blame for whatever that's happening in the world today, post 2008. But it's interesting to see that the economists are one of the only elites in the world that run the world today who have a Nobel Prize to themselves. But more often than not, this Nobel Prize has been used to confer legitimacy on a set of policies that are harmful to populations at large. They benefit a group of people, the capital holding class, right? And they don't work for all of us. This sort of a bias, yeah. So as an example, you could talk about investments in public infrastructure, investments in health, right? Healthcare systems. What Scandinavia has and what the US does not have, that sort of a thing, right? In all the 58 Nobel Prize laureates, 32 of them are American citizens or have lived in America for a long time, right? That tells you already that what sort of a bias the prize has, right? But that probably has a lot to do with the economics itself. But I believe that's not true. That's not true. There is a lot of economists on the left tradition, but who's been recognized in terms of the prize? I think, Amartya Sen, I don't know, we could make an argument about his work on development. Yeah, maybe, him. And the funniest of them all is Friedrich Hayek shares the prize with Gunnar Myrdal. Myrdal was a development economist who had to share the prize with Friedrich Hayek. He does use some of Hayek's ideas, but in a totally opposite direction. Hayek is writing about the Bengal famine, how South Asia went on to work to become something, and he definitely, uses some of Hayek's ideas. But for me, it's surprising to see that they shared a Nobel Prize. Anyways, but this is about the Nobel Prize of Economics. I think the problem lies in the assumptions that standard economics works with, that society is driven by self-seeking individuals that trade in markets, who make the perfect choice, and the perfect choices are directed through the invisible hand. You don't need a state, but that's really not true. That is not true, and we've seen this repeatedly over period of years, and the recently being in 2008. And I think here's where the Nobel Prize does the most harm. It goes on to legitimize policies, prescriptions, practitioners, practices that ought not to be recognized, ought not to be awarded. It's not the case in terms of peace or literature. We could argue about who gets the literature prize, who does not, right? We still have some sort of subjective criteria in terms of who gets the medicine, the chemistry, the physics prize, but economics. So yeah, I'm going to end over there, and comment, criticize, shout at me, or clap if it was good. Thank you.
I'm just gonna start. Navas, I corrected your text. There wasn't much to correct, but I read it beforehand, and I really loved it. I told you that, and I really think we should maybe create a moral economy prize for Navas.
I would take it gladly. But just so you know that the Nobel Prize comes with a sum of about 800,000 kroners.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll pitch it.
Yeah.
Also, one of the
That's like $15.
Yeah, it's like
no, it's not. It's a lot. Just so you know that the Swedish
$250,000. Is it $250,000 or something?
probably around that time. Yeah, probably in that region.
So I mean, that was amazing. It was really good. It's a
Yeah.
good story.
So I don't know if you still aspire to have all of you sitting over
No, I
here.
still want a Nobel
Okay.
Prize. No.
Oh,
I just want some dynamite.
But
okay.
I
Dynamite's good.
really loved the economics part. I wanted to tie that into the conversation that we were having in the last discussion. Actually, you brought up these conservatives in the United States.
Yeah.
In our conversation of on the one hand we need the public that is informed, and on the other side we need the system that informs. And I see this as a perfect example of a tool used by the system in order to legitimize things. You said this in your text. It really drives home, that our entire world is built in this way to justify, to legitimize certain policies over other ones. Especially when we go back, you mentioned that Nobel was a pacifist.
Yeah.
I think that's very telling, actually, that
Yep.
a pacifist, rich person who gets rich through selling armaments, right? He's able to do that. He's able to sell armaments, but he's called a pacifist, and that he feels bad about it at some point. So he writes in his will 1 year before he dies, at the last moment, which reminds me of people going into confession, just before they're about to die, or converting to a religion right before they die. He writes into his will, this Nobel Prize. That's really a great story that you're telling, because then it goes into what kind of values are we basing this Nobel Prize on when it started out like this.
Exactly. I think this was one of the things that got me interested in reading about this, because I mean, back from school I remember that dynamite was patented to Alfred Nobel, but then I totally forgot about it. And then it was only recently when I was reading about this, I was reading Offner's book, because it's interesting. He makes this argument about Nobel Prize and social economics, right? So how Nobel Prize serves, this is our argument that I'm trying to repeat away. But that also tells you how things worked out. I mean, at the time of his death, this guy had 90 armament factories, and I think part of the guilt also comes from the fact that one of his factories blew up in 1860s, right? And one of his brothers died. They were, I think, the family was impoverished, so 4 of them survived, and the rest of his siblings, they already passed away in their childhood or whatever. But he was a brilliant guy. I mean, he was genius and all that. 17, he's speaking Italian, French, Swedish, German, English,
Russian.
and partly Russian. Yeah, I think. The 6 languages. He was fluent in 6 languages. He also went on to wrote poetry, right?
Yeah.
He was a gifted guy, but it was just that he was dealing in explosives, Merchant of Death had that paper called him.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, one thing I want to go in here on this is, like, we talked about legitimacy, and then we also talked about like the number of Nobel laureates that come from the United States alone. 60% was it from U.S. From U.S. universities, and then in economics, 10 of the 58 Nobel laureates in economics come from the Chicago School. And that really confers a lot of legitimacy, however, on all these places. And I wanted to ask as a little trivia question now. So which country has the highest percentage of Nobel laureates to population? Can anyone guess it?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Can anyone guess it?
Tough one. I think it's Togo. No.
I like Togo. I like that answer.
Does Togo have?
No, it's the U.S.
No, it's Iceland because they have one.
Okay, but they're so tiny.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they have a population of what is it?
330,000. Yeah,
330,000 people.
Yeah.
But look at that. Now everyone thinks Iceland is an amazingly intelligent country. Oh, they must be like the smartest things
Totally.
ever, right? If you just look at it, at statistics. I mean, the ways in which the world, in which the elites, in which even good, I think good intentioned people like maybe Nobel change how we think about the world and legitimize really horrible things. Legitimize also, he's a pacifist selling dynamite, which gets to be used in wars, ballistic missiles and stuff like that. It's okay as long as it's just part of business, but what happens? Like it's okay to sell, like bring it to Germany right now. It's okay to sell, right? Doesn't matter whose hands they end up in.
This isn't the country that's got the whole nie wieder rhetoric, which means never again after the Holocaust. We're never going to do this again, but we have no problem selling weapons to people who will do this. But I mean that seems to go directly in opposition. That's directly contrary to the rhetoric of nie wieder. If nie wieder means nie wieder, which means never again, then selling weapons should be also eliminated.
Again, But that serves industry, that brings a lot of money with which you can fund, so many prizes and get good PR for that.
Good PR. Convince everybody that you're actually doing good things, even when you're not.
Totally. I mean, you go to the webpage of the Nobel Prize. They have just one line: famous for dynamite. That's it. They don't tell you anything else about Alfred Nobel. They just say he had 355 patents. His chemical business has survived still. Akzo Nobel, one of the big chemical firms, still. It carries his name, So, but what sort of chemistry was he interested in? That's kind of interesting also to look up to. They show you his paintings, his poetry.
Was he a religious man?
I don't think so. He was of Lutheran tradition, but not his. I mean, his biographical sketches that I read. I was also not interested in in the sort of investigation into his religion, but I did not read much about that.
Or Alfred the Man. That's what I mean.
Yeah, Alfred the Man. I did read a bit about him. He had, his way of living.
Not married, no kids.
Well, he did not. He had affairs with some women. He did not go. I mean, he eventually did not marry them for a long period. He did not have a wife. A long serving wife, let's say, a longer relationship.
Is this true? You mentioned that his brother died
in one of the explosions in one of their factories. Yeah.
And I remember that was actually his motivation to invent dynamite, which is a stable explosive. Because what before was we had nitroglycerin, which is very unstable.
Totally.
Which is what led to. So I mean,
absolutely.
Again, just part of the history of the person. He might have been a well-intentioned person. He might have been okay, but maybe his motivation for inventing something like this even was just personal.
Absolutely. No, I'm not saying that he would have bad intentions, but that this is precisely the story that I refer to. His brother died. His other brother was visiting South of France, Cannes, and he passed away over there. And the French press comes out with the story that the merchant of death is dead. And it was bad journalism. They assumed that Alfred Nobel had died, but he was still alive, and he's reading this, right? And then he goes like, "Oh, the guy who became rich from selling stuff that could kill people faster." More people faster, and this gave him this sort of guilt conscious, and that most of his biographers confirm go on to push him for a change of heart in terms of what to do with his wealth, because his family also profited from the oil explorations in the Caspian Sea, right? He invested into that money.
Well, he's just responsible for
he was an entrepreneur, He was an entrepreneur. That is okay. That is perfectly all right. He made his money back in the good days when you could make money. And but where did he made money from, and what did he do with it? Right? I think that's important. You know, who is the man who institutes this prize, and what leads him to institute this prize?
You know, I'd love to see like a Hollywood movie where like Alfred Nobel goes around like blowing shit up, you know, with like dynamite and stuff. You know, I just thought I'd say.
Well, I think on that note, actually, we could probably go into the morale. You know, that we have this uplifting thing. So do we have the text prepared?
Yeah. So for the morale, we've decided, since we're talking about Alfred Nobel, to talk or at least recite Jean-Paul Sartre's denial letter of the Nobel Prize and his reasons for that. And I don't know, we haven't spoken how we could do this. Should I just read it, or do you want to split this, Navaz?
No, you could totally read it.
Okay. It's about 600 words. I'll try not to bore you so much. I think it's a good letter. His reasons are pretty badass. And here it is. I deeply regret the fact that the incident has become something of a scandal. A prize was awarded, and I refused it. It happened entirely because I was not informed soon enough of what was underway. When I read it in the October 15th Figaro Littéraire, in the Swedish correspondence column, that the choice of the Swedish Academy was tending toward me, but that it had not yet been determined, I supposed that by writing a letter to the Academy, which I sent off the following day, I could make matters clear and that there would be no further discussion. I was not aware at the time that the Nobel Prize is awarded without consulting the opinion of the recipient, and I believed there was a time to prevent this from happening. But I now understand that when the Swedish Academy has made a decision, it cannot subsequently revoke it. My reasons for refusing the prize concern neither the Swedish Academy nor the Nobel Prize in itself, as I explained in my letter to the Academy. In it, I alluded to two kinds of reasons, personal and objective. The personal reasons are these. My refusal is not an impulsive gesture. I have always declined official honors. In 1945, after the war, when I was offered the Legion of Honor, I refused it, although I was sympathetic to the government. Similarly, I have never sought to enter the Collège de France, as several of my friends suggested. This attitude is based on my conception of the writer's enterprise. A writer who adopts political, social, or literary positions must act only with the means that are his own, that is, the written word. All the honors he may receive expose his readers to a pressure I do not consider desirable. If I sign myself Jean-Paul Sartre, it is not the same thing as if I sign myself Jean-Paul Sartre, Nobel Prize winner. The writer who accepts an honor of this kind involves as well as himself the association or institution which has honored him. My sympathies for the Venezuelan revolutionists commit only myself, while if Jean-Paul Sartre, the Nobel laureate, champions the Venezuelan resistance, he also commits the entire Nobel Prize as an institution. The writer must therefore refuse to let himself be transformed into an institution, even if this occurs under the most honorable circumstances, as in the present case. This attitude is of course entirely my own, and it contains no criticism of those who have already been awarded the prize. I have a great deal of respect and admiration for several of the laureates whom I have the honor to know. My objective reasons are as follows. The only battle possible today on the cultural front is the battle for the peaceful coexistence of the two cultures, that of the East and that of the West. I do not mean that they must embrace each other. I know that the confrontation of these two cultures must necessarily take the form of a conflict, but this confrontation must occur between men and between cultures, without the intervention of institutions. I myself am deeply affected by the contradiction between the two cultures. I am made up of such contradictions. My sympathies undeniably go to socialism and to what is called the Eastern Bloc. But I was born and brought up in a bourgeois family and a bourgeois culture. This permits me to collaborate with all those who seek to bring the two cultures closer together. I nonetheless hope, of course, that the best man wins. That is socialism. This is why I cannot accept an honor awarded by cultural authorities, those of the West any more than those of the East, even if I am sympathetic to their existence. Although all my sympathies are on the socialist side, I should thus be quite as unable to accept, for example, the Lenin Prize if someone wanted to give it to me, which is not the case. I know that the Nobel Prize in itself is not a literary prize of the Western Bloc, but it is what is made of it, and events may occur which are outside the province of the members of the Swedish Academy. This is why, in the present situation, the Nobel Prize stands objectively as a distinction reserved for the writers of the West or the rebels of the East. It has not been awarded, for example, to Neruda, who is one of the greatest South American poets. There has never been serious question of giving it to Louis Aragon, though he certainly deserves it. It is regrettable that the prize was given to Pasternak and not to Sholokhov, and that the only Soviet work thus honored should be one published abroad and banned in its own country. A balance might have been established by a similar gesture in the other direction. During the war in Algeria, when we had signed the Declaration of the 121, I should have gratefully accepted the prize, because it would have honored not only me, but also the freedom for which we were fighting. But matters did not turn out that way, and it is only after the battle is over that the prize has been awarded to me. In discussing the motives of the Swedish Academy, mention has been made of freedom, a word that suggests many interpretations. In the West, only a general freedom is meant. Personally, I mean a more concrete freedom which consists of the right to have more than one pair of shoes and to eat one's fill. It seems to me less dangerous to decline the prize than to accept it. If I accept it, I offer myself to what I shall call an objective rehabilitation. According to the Figaro Littéraire article, a controversial political past would not be held against me. I know that this article does not express the opinion of the Academy, but it clearly shows how my acceptance would be interpreted by certain rightist circles. I consider this controversial political past as still valid, even if I am quite prepared to acknowledge to my comrades certain past errors. I do not thereby mean that the Nobel Prize is a bourgeois prize, but such is the bourgeois interpretation which would inevitably be given by certain circles with which I am very familiar. Lastly, I come to the question of the money. It is a very heavy burden that the Academy imposes upon the laureate by accompanying its homage with an enormous sum, and this problem has tortured me. Either one accepts the prize, and with the prize money can support organizations or movements one considers important. My own thoughts went to the Apartheid Committee in London. Or else one declines the prize on generous principles and thereby deprives such a movement of badly needed support. But I believe this to be a false problem. I obviously renounce the 250,000 crowns because I do not wish to be institutionalized in either East or West. But one cannot be asked, on the other hand, to renounce for 250,000 crowns principles which are not only one's own, but are shared by all one's comrades. That is what has made so painful for me both the awarding of the prize and the refusal of it I am obliged to make. I wish to end this declaration with a message of fellow feeling for the Swedish public.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Eddie, and I think with that we can end our podcast. Thank you for listening. As you are probably are aware, we have a propaganda podcast Facebook page. Also, we have a new YouTube channel called Propaganda Podcast. And we in iTunes, you can find us under Propaganda Podcast. Am I forgetting anything?
No, it's just that for the next nomination for the prize, you could also mention us. Nominate us because people can
nominate
always
us. Sure. Yep.
nominate. There's public nominations that the
Nominate Navas, really.
I think I have to say right now I'm going to be refusing it. But nominate us.
No, that would be awesome. They nominate us, we get the prize, and we refuse it.
Yeah.
Nah, man, I say okay, yeah.
Yeah, don't
Well, the money.
The money, man.
So you guys see that the moral economy is still the moral economy.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
Find us on Twitter and Facebook, and stay critical.
Stay critical.
Stay critical.
They're critical.
And organize.
And organize and be compassionate. Good night.